The Financial Times podcast frames it as a reputational query. Did a well-delivered conference speech still the knives and halt the slide? And the panel's answer is, well, maybe for a moment. The better question is capacity. What can Kemi Badenoch actually do now? And the sombre answer is nothing that changes outcomes except resign, and the sooner the better. First, the optics. Manchester looked threadbare. Even admirers conceded she'd bought time, not authority. A leader who must survive conference has already lost the strategic initiative. The FT's own people who were discussing this noted the triumph was mostly relative, a confident performance against a backdrop of empty halls, grim polling, and rivals measuring the curtains. Second, the policy theatre, the headline pledge, abolishing stamp duty on primary residences with pure adrenaline, not statecrafted. Front loads an election-style giveaway in year one of a parliament signals fiscal weakness and pins her to an expensive promise with no credible pay that survives contract or contact with reality. Even sympathetic commentators called the announcement a tell of fragility rather than of strength. And if we take the promise at face value, her own party channels affirm it. Total abolition on main homes, with a price tag for her allies themselves pitch at £9 billion. In a fiscal climate already defined by hard choices, that is not a growth plan, it's a hostage to fortune. Third, the funding myth. Conference chatter leaned on heroic savings from welfare, Whitehall and aid, with numbers north of £40 billion waved through the hall as if they were loose change. The FT panel called this out as a confidence play. Strong on vibes, thin on arithmetic. You can fire up members with lines about waste and worklessness. You cannot thread a budget on applause. Fourth, the flank threat. If Badenoch looked secure for an evening, the camera still cut to Robert Jenrick. He worked the fringe like a leadership candidate, complete with judicial cosplay and a promise to rewrite the constitutional ecosystem around the courts. The party's right now has a ready alternative who polls the base and feeds the media. A leader who cannot outshine her designated heir is living on borrowed authority. And fifth, the audience problem. The FT noted what mattered about her speech was the target, and this was a party room address, not a country-wide message. It shifted, it rallied activists. It didn't rebalance the national story, which is still Labour's stewardship plus reform's grievance. And you cannot beat Farage by refusing to say his name forever. And you cannot rebuild the Tory coalition by promising Thatcherite pageantry without Thatcherite preparation. 6. Capacity versus choreography. Real capacity would show in 3 places: a credible fiscal anchor, a migration policy that survives the courts, and a growth offer beyond slogans. What we saw was choreography, a stamp duty sugar rush, and a culture war duet with Jenrick. The country's problems will not yield to that playlist. So, to the only honest conclusion, if the question is, can she govern from opposition and rebuild a viable party in time to matter, the evidence says no. The constitutional calendar doesn't care about ovations. The polling ice will not thaw because the speech landed. If she cannot reset the project in the next few weeks with costed policy that points to fiscal consolidation and supply-side reform worth the name, resignation becomes not an act of surrender but an act of conservation, conserving the possibility that the centre-right remains competitive in the next cycle rather than entrenching a lost cause now. And this is where Neil Kinnock, of all people, is instructive. He warns that if the Conservative Party dies, which is very likely, we all lose, because the system needs a rational, forward-looking party on the right to contest Labour and keep the democratic marketplace healthy. That is not a partisan jibe, it's a constitutional memo. If Badenoch continues to refuse conference bounce with, or confuse conference bounce with strategic recovery, she accelerates the very extinction Kinnock fears. The paradox is sharp. To preserve the competitive right, Badenoch must have to leave it. A final word on the FT's framing, and has she silenced her critics, is the kind of question campaigns like, because it treats politics as noise management. The country is not a soundstage. Voters will judge by capacity, not cadence, and on that test, the only one that counts, the speech was a flourish, not a fix. If she stays, the party drifts towards a choice between theatrical radicalism and managerial austerity with no growth story in the middle. If she goes, an alternative can at least try to build one. I don't think that will be Robert Jenrick. And that is why the right question is unforgiving. What can she do? Nothing that changes the end game. Therefore, she should resign.